Hey guys, it's Halcyon here. Welcome to the final part of my Battlefield 1 medic guide. Today we'll be covering some expert topics like advanced positioning, spawn strategy, and advanced combat tips. I would consider the information in this video to be best suited for medics who can consistently place within the top 10 players in Conquest. Failing that, you should at least be very comfortable with the basics, the loadout, and have good situational awareness. If this doesn't apply to you, go and check out my past videos, which will help you get up to par. Positioning is a complex topic. The easiest way to define it would be placing yourself in a location so that you maximize your effectiveness while minimizing the enemy's effectiveness. One example of good positioning is finding a spot on the battlefield where you are able to guard a large number of angles, while at the same time minimizing the number of angles the enemy has on you. For offensive classes, this should be the primary goal of positioning, but for medics it's a little more complex because you have to place a larger emphasis on the position of your teammates as well. I'm not going to go over specific spots on the different maps, perhaps I will in a future video, but let's examine a few general scenarios which you're most likely to run into, and then decide on what the best positions would be on each. You and your team are advancing on a point that is being actively defended by the enemy. Let's assume that there will be places where you can take cover from the enemies defending the point. First off, let's make our goals in this situation clear. We should be attempting to keep our teammates healed and revived so that they can kill as many of the enemies as possible, while also looking for and stopping counterattacks from the flanks. Most people will tell you that sticking behind your teammates is the way to go. This is decent advice, but if you want to be even more effective, it might be better to take up a position behind cover slightly ahead and to the side of your teammates. Reason being that you'll be closer to each of them as they advance, making it easier to heal and revive. You'll also have a better line of sight. If you were behind them, you would have to poke out of cover to throw a medical pouch, potentially exposing yourself to the enemy. There's also the potential of being suppressed if you are spotted and then being separated from your team as they continue to advance. If you're slightly ahead of your team, they're much more likely to notice the enemies firing at you, and they'll break the suppression for you. Finally, by being at the back of the group, you open yourself up to flank attacks from behind. If you're slightly ahead of your team, you'll be looking backwards at them, and are therefore much more likely to notice and dispatch enemies attempting to flank before they can do damage to your team. You and your team are defending a point that is being actively attacked by the enemy. Let's assume that there will be places where you can take cover from the enemies attacking the point. Again, we should be attempting to keep our teammates healed and revived. Covering the flanks, while still useful, isn't nearly as important, however. In a defensive situation, your team is much more likely to be spread out and observing multiple angles already. In this kind of situation, you should pay careful attention to where the battles are happening, and move around the point into different areas of cover that are best suited for healing teammates who are currently engaging the enemy. Pay attention to the sounds of gunfire, and look for skull icons. Both of these will clue you in to where you need to be. Try to pick positions where you cannot be shot, but where you can still heal teammates, and try not to pick positions where you might be flanked, because no one is watching that direction. This isn't as important if you have a scout on your team who actually knows how to use the flare gun, but unless you're playing with a good squad who is using voice communication, it's always best to assume that your teammates will not do their job. When attacking or defending a position where the enemy has cover and your team has none or very limited cover, you should attempt to use your teammates as cover. Most players are smart enough to know that you should be targeting the medic first, but if you're behind your team, they'll have a much harder job of it. As always, you should focus on healing and revives, but you should also be attempting to suppress and kill enemies in the back of their group with your rifle. This is why I prefer the scoped variants of the rifles. Your teammates need to focus on aiming at the enemies in the front of their group. However, this opens them up to fire from enemies farther away, including snipers. If you keep the snipers out of the picture, or at least suppress them, your team will have a much easier job at clearing the enemies using cover. You'll also be helping out your own snipers, as they'll be free to focus on the front lines without having to worry about being counter-sniped. Good movement skills are very important in no-cover situations. I'll explain what I mean by this later in the guide. Strategy is a subject that most people associate with leadership and squad play. That kind of strategy is a subject for another video. In this video, I'm only going to cover the most important strategic decision that all medics have to make. Where should you be on the battlefield? Often you'll find that there are a number of offenses and defenses going on around the map. It can be tough to decide where to spawn. I'm going to give you some tips that you can consider when you're having a hard time deciding. Generally, you should attempt to join battles that look winnable and which don't have too many medics already. Remember, as a medic you need to be around teammates in order to truly be effective. Making the right choice here can mean the difference between sitting around doing nothing, dying constantly, and raking in tons of points while having a huge impact on the game. For example, let's say your team is pushing on points C and D and defending point A. Point A is only being attacked by a lone enemy scout. Point D is heavily defended by vehicles, while C only has infantry. In this case, you should probably join the push at C. While it might be tempting to go scout hunting to prevent them from getting the point, you should leave that to your teammates, or switch to a class better suited to stopping stealth captures, like another scout, who can fire the flare gun to reveal the enemy's position. Now, if the battles at C and D are fairly equal, infantry versus infantry with no vehicles involved, but the C push already has a lot of medic support, while the push at D doesn't have a medic at all, you should join the push at D. If possible, you should also attempt to join up with teammates who are going for points deep behind enemy lines, especially if they lack medic support, and especially if they're in your squad. Capturing these points can be good for your team. If they're fighting over a point near the middle of the map, this will draw some defenders back and potentially allow the main force to break through. One last thing, don't be afraid to redeploy if necessary. Sure, it counts as a death, but if you're not doing anything and you're far away from a point that is in jeopardy, instead of running across the map to it, redeploy and spawn there to defend it. You might be the tipping point that allows your team to hold on to it. There are many factors in your playstyle that you can tweak to improve your effectiveness in combat. I'm not going to cover all of them in this video because I would like to talk only about the things which are most relevant to the medic. One of the reasons that the medic is so powerful is because they have the ability to heal themselves in combat. While most classes would have to sit behind a rock for 30 seconds to heal up to full, the medic can simply throw a bandage pouch or medical crate at his feet and be good to go in no time. If you're using the bandage pouch, prioritize healing yourself over teammates if you are wounded. After all, if you die, then they won't get the heals anyway. Probably the most important tip I can give for surviving in combat situations is, don't shoot unless you have to. Shooting draws attention to yourself. Attention is the last thing you want as a medic. You should let your teammates draw attention, and only fire at enemies who are already engaging someone, or those who threaten your survival, such as those coming in for a flank. Obviously, there are exceptions, as I mentioned earlier, like shooting at enemies at the back of a group when pushing on a position with no cover. The last topic I want to cover is movement, in the context of moving from location to location safely. You should almost always be moving around constantly and in a random fashion. Even if you're behind cover, there's always the possibility that an enemy sniper is watching your direction. Standing still makes you a very juicy target indeed. I know that when I play as a sniper, stationary targets are my top priority. Don't make yourself a target by standing still. On a related note, any decent shot can shoot someone who is running in a straight line. If you're running straight towards someone, the only thing that is changing from their perspective is your size on their screen, either getting bigger or smaller. So if you're out in the open to perhaps revive someone, make yourself more unpredictable by moving in a sideways, zigzag fashion. To do this, turn the camera to the left or right, and press the W key and the A or D key, which corresponds to the direction you turned your camera. The principle is the same for controllers. Also, try to minimize the time you spend running out in the open. Do short sprints from cover to cover if possible. Even if no one is watching, it pays to be paranoid. And that concludes the final part of my Battlefield 1 medic guide. I plan to do more guides in the future for the other classes, but in my next few videos I'm going to talk about more general topics that apply to any class that you're playing. I'm also going to make videos where I analyze specific maps and give tips for playing on each of them. If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe to my channel for more like it. Thanks for watching, guys. Halcyon out.